This April, 4 death row inmates took their final breaths, each one leaving behind a trail of devastation that can never be undone. Michael Tanzy, April 8, Florida. After more than 2 decades on Florida's death row, Michael Tanzy was executed for the brutal 2000 murder of 49-year-old Janet Acosta. In the days leading up to his death, his legal team launched a final, unusual appeal, arguing that his morbid obesity could make lethal injection unbearably painful. But the courts ultimately rejected the claim, and on April 8, the state carried out the execution as scheduled. On April 25, 2000, Janet Acosta was sitting in her van during her lunch break at the Japanese Gardens in Miami, reading a book. Tanzy, stranded in the city and trying to get back to Key West, approached her and asked for a cigarette and the time. Then, without warning, he punched her in the face and forced his way into the van. Holding her at knife point with a razor, Tanzy drove off, keeping her subdued by gripping her wrist. At a gas station in Homestead, he gagged her with a towel and bound her with rope from the van. He threatened to kill her if she made a sound. Acosta handed over $53 in cash, and Tanzy tried to use her ATM card to buy cigarettes and a Coke. He then coerced her into performing oral sex. After realizing he had broken her teeth during the initial assault, he stopped. Later, in Tavernier, Tanzy again used threats to get Acosta's PIN number and withdrew money from her account. He also stopped to buy more razor blades and duct tape. By around 6:30 p.m., they had reached Sugarloaf Key. Fearing Acosta could identify him, Tanzy decided to kill her. On a remote road in Cudjoe Key, he strangled her with rope, pausing to muffle her face with duct tape before continuing until she was dead. He left her body in a wooded area where he believed it wouldn't be found. After the murder, Tanzy used her ATM card to shop, eat, and visit friends in Key West. He planned to change the van's appearance, buy drugs, and go into hiding. But on April 27, police, who had been surveilling the van after Acosta was reported missing, caught him returning to it. He had receipts from her bank account in his pocket. Tanzy immediately confessed to the crime. In custody, he provided detailed statements and showed investigators where he had discarded the body, rope, and duct tape. He initially pleaded not guilty, but changed his plea before trial, admitting to first-degree murder, carjacking, kidnapping, and armed robbery. During the penalty phase, defense attorneys presented evidence of severe childhood trauma and mental illness. Experts testified that Tanzy had been essayed starting at age 8 and was diagnosed with PTSD, bipolar disorder, ADHD, and antisocial personality disorder, among others. His mother recalled signs of emotional damage following his father's illness and death, as well as the prolonged abuse by an older boy. Despite this, the jury unanimously recommended a death sentence. Tanzy was also linked to the 1999 murder of Carolyn Holder in Massachusetts. Although he was never tried in that case, investigators believed he stabbed and strangled the 36-year-old woman. Prosecutors declined to pursue the case since he was already sentenced to death in Florida. As his execution date approached, Tanzy's lawyers filed a last-minute appeal, arguing that his extreme obesity could interfere with the sedative used in Florida's lethal injection protocol. They claimed the drug, etomidate, might not keep him unconscious, putting him at risk of experiencing the feeling of being burned from the inside while paralyzed and unable to react. The state pushed back, saying the drug had been successfully used in numerous executions and there was no evidence it would fail in Tanzy's case. Circuit Judge Timothy Cohen dismissed the appeal, and the Florida Supreme Court declined to intervene. Despite the dramatic claims, the execution proceeded as scheduled. Tanzy had a spiritual advisor as his only visitor after he got up at 4:45 a.m. on the day of his execution. His final meal consisted of a candy bar, ice cream, corn, bacon, and pork chop. At Florida State Prison, Tanzy received a 3-drug injection and was declared dead at 6:12 p.m. He made the final statement saying, "I want to apologize to the family," prior to reciting a Bible passage just before the drugs started to flow. His chest heaved for 3 minutes, then stopped, and the corrections officers shook his shoulders and called his name twice to see if he was still conscious, but he was not. Mikal Madi, April 11, South Carolina. Mikal Madi remained on death row for the 2004 killing of a South Carolina police officer during a violent, multi-state crime spree. Originally from Virginia, Madi embarked on a 3-day rampage in July 2004 that left 2 men dead and included carjackings, robberies, and multiple assaults. On July 15, 2004, Madi murdered 29-year-old convenience store clerk Christopher Jason Boggs in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. 2 days later, he carjacked a man in Columbia, South Carolina, and fled to a nearby farm in Calhoun County. There, he encountered 56-year-old James Myers, an off-duty police captain, and killed him before setting his body on fire. Madi evaded capture for 4 days after Myers' death, but he was arrested in Florida on July 21, 2004. He was extradited to South Carolina, where he was later found guilty and sentenced to death in 2006. In 2011, he was transferred to North Carolina, tried for the murder of Boggs, and received a life sentence without parole. Despite multiple appeals, Madi's death sentence was upheld. The South Carolina Supreme Court signed his death warrant on March 14, 2025, scheduling his execution for April 11, 2025. Madi chose to die by firing squad. He was the second person in the state to do so this year, stating it was the least cruel of the available methods. On July 14, 2004, 21-year-old Madi stole Virginia license plates, a station wagon, and a .38 caliber handgun from a neighbor before heading south. The next day, he entered a convenience store in Winston-Salem, picked up a beer, and fatally shot Christopher Boggs in the face when the clerk asked for ID. Madi fired another round into Boggs's body before fleeing with a beer. After the murder, Madi drove to Columbia, South Carolina. There, he carjacked Corey Pitts and armed himself with a revolver. He then swapped the license plates with the ones he had stolen in Virginia. After 35 minutes of driving, Madi stopped at a gas station and attempted to use a credit card to pay for fuel. When the pump refused the card and employees became suspicious, Madi fled on foot. Later that day, he arrived at a farm in Calhoun County owned by Captain James Myers of the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety. While Myers celebrated family birthdays at the beach, Madi rummaged through the property's workshop looking through firearms and watching TV. When Myers returned to the farm, Madi ambushed him with a .22 caliber rifle, held him hostage, and ultimately shot him 9 times. He then poured diesel on Myers' body and set it ablaze. Madi fled in Myers' police-issued truck, taking multiple firearms with him. Myers' wife, Amy Tripp Myers, also a law enforcement officer, became alarmed when he failed to return home. She discovered his burned body and alerted authorities. Florida police apprehended Madi on July 21, 2004, after spotting him driving Myers' truck. He attempted to flee on foot with one of Myers' weapons, but ultimately dropped it and surrendered. In 2009, while incarcerated at Lieber Correctional Institution, Madi and serial killer Quincy Allen plotted to kill a corrections officer. They crafted homemade knives and attacked guard Nathan Sasser after luring him to the prison yard. Though seriously injured, Sasser survived the stabbing, but later developed PTSD and left law enforcement. While Madi and Allen were charged for the assault, prosecutors dropped the case because both men were already sentenced to death. Quincy Allen's sentence was eventually overturned, and in July 2024, he was resentenced to life after accepting a plea deal. Madi, however, remained on death row. In 2023, Madi joined a group of inmates who sued South Carolina over the use of the electric chair and firing squad, claiming both methods amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. The courts dismissed the case. On March 28, 2025, Madi officially chose the firing squad as his method of execution, saying he feared being burned and mutilated in the electric chair or suffering a prolonged death by lethal injection. His lawyer called it the least evil of the 3 choices. Madi filed a last-minute appeal, arguing that his original defense team failed to present mitigating evidence about his traumatic upbringing. The court rejected the appeal, agreeing with prosecutors who maintained that Madi's background did not excuse his crimes. Born on March 20, 1983 in Virginia, Madi's childhood was marked by instability and neglect. His father, Sharif, had converted to Islam, married a 16-year-old, and struggled with the law and employment. Madi's mother left in 1986, and by 1991, Madi and his brother were sent to live with relatives. At 8 years old, Madi moved in with an uncle in Maryland and attended school in Baltimore. He struggled academically and behaviorally, especially with reading comprehension and respect for authority. School reports noted low self-esteem and poor interpersonal skills. In 1992, Madi was involuntarily hospitalized for a suicide threat. He later moved back in with his father and brother in 1997 and committed his first burglary that same year. Convicted of multiple charges, Madi spent time in juvenile detention before moving to Richmond with his mother. In 2001, Madi was sentenced to 93 months in prison for assaulting a Virginia police officer. Released in May 2004 and placed on 15 years probation, he launched his deadly spree just 2 months later. At 6:05 p.m. on the day of his execution, Mikal Madi, 42 years old, was declared dead after the firing squad placed a hood over his head and fired 3 bullets into his heart at once. Witnessing the execution, his lawyer described it as barbaric and described it as a horrifying act that belongs in the darkest chapters of history, not in a civilized society. Madi refused to give a final statement. According to a reporter who was present at the execution, Madi screamed as the bullet struck him and then let out 2 groans around 45 seconds later. Madi died less than 4 minutes after the rounds were fired. His last meal was a ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea. Moises Sandoval Mendoza, April 23, Texas. He had been found guilty of the 2004 murder of 20-year-old Rochelle Tolson in Collin County, Texas. Mendoza strangled her, kept her body hidden behind his house for several days, and later burned and buried it in a remote rural area beneath a brush pile. Both Mendoza and Rochelle had attended Farmsville High School and graduated in 2001, though they didn't know each other well at the time. They reconnected around 6 weeks before the murder while attending Collin County Community College. On the night of March 17, 2004, Mendoza was reportedly drinking heavily at a friend's house with 2 other men. By the next day, Rochelle had gone missing. Her 6-month-old baby was found alone at home, which led her family to immediately report her disappearance to the police. The scene inside her home was chaotic, with overturned furniture suggesting a possible struggle or abduction. Authorities later learned that Mendoza had picked Rochelle up from her home after the baby had gone to sleep. He confessed to a friend, Stacy Marie Garcia, that he had strangled Rochelle. In her statement to law enforcement, Garcia said Mendoza admitted to essaying her, stabbing her in the neck, and initially hiding her body behind his home on Jackson Street. He later relocated the body, wrapped in a tarp, to Brushy Creek after being questioned by police. The remains were discovered when a man hunting for arrowheads spotted 2 feet sticking out from a brush pile. The body had been badly burned and dental records were required for identification. Mendoza reportedly told Garcia that he had torched the body to destroy any fingerprints or evidence. He also claimed that he and Rochelle were in a relationship, though friends of the victim refuted this. According to them, Rochelle had only recently met Mendoza at a party and she was not interested in him romantically. Some speculated that her rejection may have triggered the violence. The brutal murder shocked the small community of Farmsville. Neighbors and acquaintances described Mendoza as polite, hard-working young man who often helped his father. Many were stunned that he could be responsible for such a horrific crime. However, Mendoza did have a documented history of violent behavior. In April 2003, police records showed he had been charged with misdemeanor assault after allegedly attacking his sister in their front yard. The case was dismissed after his sister chose not to pursue charges. Additionally, Mendoza was awaiting trial for 3 counts of aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon in connection to gunpoint robberies at Richland College in Dallas in March 2003. In January 2005, Mendoza was also charged with several counts of child essay, but those charges were dropped after his conviction for capital murder. Following his conviction, Mendoza filed numerous appeals claiming ineffective legal representation during his trial and post-conviction proceedings. However, both federal courts and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his appeals. After years of legal battles, the court determined he had exhausted all options and set his execution date. Mendoza was executed by lethal injection on April 23, closing a chapter on a case that left deep scars in the local community and among those who knew and loved Rochelle Tolson. His last words were directed towards his family and the victim's family. "I am sorry for having robbed you of Rochelle's life. I am sorry for that. I know nothing that I could ever say or do would ever make up for that. I want you to know that I am sincere. I apologize." The family members of the victim were her parents, one brother, a cousin, and an uncle. Her daughter was not present at the execution. Mendoza's family was seen very distraught in the witness room. His last words towards them were, "I love you, I am with you, I am well and at peace. You know that I am well and everything is love." His wife, his sister, and 2 friends were there in his final moments. Texas doesn't offer any special final meals since 2011, so he ate what was on the menu that day. James Osgood, April 24, Alabama. Osgood was executed by lethal injection at the William C. Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. His execution followed a series of legal proceedings and appeals stemming from his conviction for the brutal 2010 essay and murder of 44-year-old Tracy Lynn Brown in Chilton County. The Alabama Supreme Court had authorized the execution after a request was filed by the Alabama Attorney General's office on February 11, 2025. The court granted the request on March 6. Governor Kay Ivey subsequently set the official execution date. Osgood and his then-girlfriend Tonya Van Dyke attacked Brown at her home. Court documents revealed that Brown, who was Van Dyke's cousin, was coerced at gunpoint to engage in sex acts. She was then savagely beaten, stabbed in the back, and had her throat slit. Her body was discovered on October 13, 2010, after she failed to show up for work. Both Osgood and Van Dyke were arrested and charged in connection to the crime. Van Dyke received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Osgood was convicted on 2 counts of capital murder, murder committed during the course of both first-degree essay and first-degree sodomy. Although Osgood's conviction was upheld by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, his sentencing was initially overturned due to errors in the judge's instructions to the jury during the penalty phase. The case was sent back to Chilton County Circuit Court for a new sentencing hearing. However, in a rare move, Osgood requested to be sent back to death row before the resentencing could take place. When the judge asked why he would make such a request, Osgood reportedly said he believed an eye for an eye and felt he deserved to die for what he had done. Tracy Brown's murder shocked the community and devastated her family. The nature of the crime was particularly brutal and personal, given the family connection between the victim and one of the perpetrators. Osgood's execution was the last to be carried out in the U.S. in April 2025, closing a dark chapter in a case that had haunted Chilton County for nearly 15 years. At 6:09 p.m., the witness room's curtains opened. Osgood turned to face relatives seated in a witness room as the execution began. As he passed out, friends and family wept softly. Wearing a khaki prison uniform and strapped on a gurney, Osgood spoke about his victim in his final moments. His last words were, "I haven't said her name since that day. I was not sure if I should say it. Tracy, I apologize." Around 6:15 p.m., his head fell back onto the gurney as his breathing grew laborious and heavy. By approximately 6:18 p.m., his breathing was no longer detectable. He was declared dead a few minutes later. 5 attempts were made to attach the 2 necessary IV lines to Osgood. His final meal was pizza. He declined his lunch tray but ate breakfast and some snacks. On Thursday, Osgood had meetings with 11 individuals, including his sister and daughter, other relatives, friends, and a lawyer. He also had a phone conversation with someone. For the month of May, 5 people are scheduled for execution. Jeffrey Hutchinson, May 1st, Florida; Glenn Rogers, May 15, Florida; Matthew Johnson, May 20, Texas; Benjamin Ritchie, May 20, Indiana; and Oscar Smith on May 22, Tennessee. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.